Alright, what's up YouTube, what's up internet, what's up anybody who chooses to watch this. My name is David, you can call me Disheveled Dolo, and I want to talk today about the NBA, and specifically LeBron James's comments today regarding Daryl Morey and the Hong Kong situation. Just first, a little context for those that haven't been paying attention. About 4 months ago, China tried to introduce an extradition bill into Taiwan and Hong Kong. We're specifically focusing on Hong Kong in this situation because Hong Kong is much more close to China. The bill would have given China the right to detain and transfer Hong Kong citizens out of Hong Kong. This is something that is very scary to people in Hong Kong because they have spent years with the ideas of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of information, these very basic ideas that are building blocks of a society when they are implemented that are not allowed in China because it is a totalitarian regime, and as all totalitarian regimes, they have to be very careful and controlling of what kind of information gets passed between its people. In that way, this is a lot bigger than just Hong Kong. It has a lot to do with China. It has a lot to do with all the countries that are in China's sphere. Obviously, people in Hong Kong also don't want this to happen because they were afraid that their loved ones would be abducted. They're saying things that the Chinese government didn't like. I use that as a segue into what happened with Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey is a NBA GM of the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets have a long history with China because of Yao Ming and his career. I refuse to think that Daryl Morey didn't understand what he was doing and didn't understand the timing of what he was doing when the NBA teams were headed to China, but Daryl Morey decided to tweet out support for the protesters in Hong Kong. Although this tweet was very quickly deleted, it still led to a very, very powerful response from China, with China using its power over Tencent, which is the big media company in China, and specifically the company that has a broadcasting contract with NBA. China used its influence over Tencent to make it so that no Rocket games would be broadcast within China. They also removed China from many of their websites. This is very similar to what they did to South Park, the history of Tiananmen Square. This is exactly why Google pulled out of China, because when there's things that don't fit their narrative, they tend to remove them. Anyways, this has led to a big backlash with the Rockets owner, who had recently bought the Rockets and obviously was very much looking forward to the Chinese revenue of his new product that he had bought. He immediately distanced himself from Daryl Morey, said he was going to fire him, or didn't say he was going to fire him, but said he didn't speak for the company and seemed to indicate that he was going to bow to pressure and fire him. This is where I want to say that I do give props to Adam Silver for standing tall on this subject and refusing to let Morey be fired. At the same time, I have to say, I kind of doubt that Morey was going to be fired, because firing him for expressing his opinions would be a giant firestorm, more than this is, I think. Anyways, I will also say that I kind of am critical of the NBA and the way they've been handling protesters in their arenas. I understand that they don't want it to be a distraction to the games, but these are also publicly funded arenas that the cities give to the owners, and I think the owners should be a little more conscientious of the fact that the only reason they're there is because the fans let them be there. Anyways, leading on to how this gets us to today. Today, LeBron James, after returning from China, made some comments, and I think what I've seen in all the coverage of these comments and most of the ESPN coverage, even though some of it has been very critical of him, most of what people are seeming to say is that this was a misunderstanding or a poor choice of words at worst. I'm actually going to disagree with that. I'm going to say that I think LeBron James actually had a very well thought out statement, and I think that it actually very much towed the line of Chinese state propaganda. I'll read his quote now. "I don't want to get into a word or sentence feud with Daryl Morey, but I believe he wasn't educated on the situation at hand, and he spoke, and so many people could have been harmed, not only financially but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and what we say and what we do, even though yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negative that comes with that too." Now I want to point out first that the idea that he's using, that Daryl Morey is misinformed or uninformed, his words are misinformed, or lacked understanding into this area, is very crucial to a lot of the propaganda that has been behind these messages for Daryl Morey to be fired. I think a big point of it is to be that Western audiences are lied to and don't have access to the real information, and therefore are incapable of understanding what is going on with Hong Kong. At the same time, that's an argument for why Westerners should not involve themselves in this conflict, because China doesn't want them involved, obviously, but also because they're trying to say, if you don't understand what you're talking about, you shouldn't say anything. I think the proof that this is very possibly a piece of propaganda that LeBron James has dropped on American society is that he specifically followed that up by saying that not only was Daryl Morey misinformed, but that LeBron James was too uninformed to have his own opinion. So how could LeBron James have enough knowledge to know that Daryl Morey was uninformed or misinformed, but also have not enough knowledge to know anything about the subject or enough to talk about it? I think it's kind of an oxymoron, and it kind of explains what I'm saying, that really what he was trying to say is that none of them have any right to talk about this because none of them understand it. And I think he was speaking for the league when he was saying that he didn't know enough to speak on this. And I think it's very troubling. The second thing I'm going to say, and one thing I'll say about this is, it's troubling because it's insinuating that the Hong Kong people are lying. Second, I want to point out that a lot of the criticism that Morey has received and a lot of the reasons that people have been calling for his resignation or his being fired, his termination, is that they were saying that it's not about whether or not he has an opinion. It's about him being the face of a company. Obviously, the Houston Rockets have a long history with China, and they're trying to say that because of his position and his place in a company, he doesn't have the ability to have his own opinion. But that's not the way we do things. And I understand that that's China's right to have their opinion, but I would very much say that the NBA is going down a dangerous path. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because LeBron is also kind of parroting this point. He's saying that Daryl Morey didn't understand, didn't grasp how it was bigger than him. Now, him speaking about this was unjust because it hurt so many people. Which also brings me to the reports that NBA players, when they met with Adam Silver, were hoping that Daryl Morey would be punished. And my question is why? I'm not really sure the last time an NBA player was punished for having a political opinion. Maybe LeBron James could inform me on that, unless he's too informed to talk on that subject as well. The third topic I wanted to talk about is this economic threat that the Chinese government and the Chinese fan base has levied against America. I want to be very specific. As far as I can tell, the only threats that have been made is to stop broadcasting the Rockets. This is not, maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see how this is a threat to the rest of the team's revenue. LeBron James specifically mentions that it threatens people's financially. How? Who else is involved in this? I don't think Kyle Kuzma has a deal with the Rockets. I don't think LeBron James has a deal with the Rockets. As far as I can tell, LeBron James has $1 billion deal with Nike that will go the rest of his life, and LeBron James has Space Jam 2 coming out, and as far as I can tell, Space Jam 2 is going to be aired in China, which I'm very much thinking he's counting on. So I don't understand how this is a threat to everybody, and how Daryl Morey put other people in harm. I understand he put his organization in harm, but he was the general manager of it. It seems like his opinion and his right to do so, maybe. I mean, that's debatable. But the man obviously felt the need to say something. But the final point I want to talk to, I want to focus on the sentence LeBron said. So just be careful what we tweet and what we say and what we do. Even though, yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negatives that come with that too. What? I just want to say that when I was in Hong Kong, I remember watching TV with one of my friends who spoke Cantonese and Mandarin, and he was telling me, this was in 2015, I guess, because Donald Trump was on television, and it was during the election, and he was telling me that what they were saying is that they were arguing that Donald Trump was an example of why democracy was bad, because we had democracy, and democracy put us in a position where we could elect a clown in their eyes. I think this is a statement that very much kind of has the same smell to it, the whiffs, he's saying that there is a lot of negatives that come with that too. And the sentence right before that is, he says, to have freedom. We do have freedom, but there can be a lot of negatives that come with that too. What am I misunderstanding? What are we misunderstanding? It seems very clear that LeBron James is letting us know that freedom of speech has a lot of negatives. And it seems like that would be something that the Chinese government would be very quick to say to its own populace, that freedom of speech has a lot of negatives, like people that could wreck your social stability. Which brings me to the quote that CCTV, which is associated with the Chinese government, decided to say when Adam Silver originally came out and said that Daryl Morey would not be getting fired for expressing his personal beliefs. He said, "We're strongly dissatisfied and oppose Adam Silver's claim to support Morey's right to freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We believe that any remarks that challenge national sovereignty and social stability are not within the scope of freedom of speech." So when people talk about the scope of freedom of speech, they're talking about the way freedom of speech works within democracy, and also the way freedom of speech works within our own individuality. And I think in both of these situations, I have to say challenging social stability is a very interesting word, but it's kind of playing into what LeBron James is saying, that freedom of speech can be dangerous. I would ask this: LeBron James decided to call Donald Trump a bum. Well, one, when he called Donald Trump a bum, did he represent the entire NBA when he said this? Obviously no, which deals with my point earlier. My second point would be when LeBron James is calling the president a bum, which I don't disagree with. I don't like Donald Trump. But when LeBron James is calling Donald Trump a bum, couldn't Donald Trump make the argument that that threatens social stability? Doesn't it seem like Donald Trump would love to make that argument when all he does is rail against journalists and move closer to countries that are known for decapitating and chopping up journalists? And that's why these things are important. You know, that Martin Luther King quote, something about injustices, I have a feeling LeBron James knows the quote. When we allow tyranny to rule, it's not good for the rest of the world, because it tends to have a way of breaking down on people. And I want to say finally that I know I heard some on the Zach Lowe post, and I think Zach Lowe is one of the best sports journalists in America. He was saying that he thinks there's NBA owners who are legitimately thinking that this is going to blow over and that the Rockets are going to be allowed to be broadcast in China again. And I would say I don't think those people understand how totalitarian regimes work. I think the key points of a regime is they don't bend, they exert force. And this is what we're dealing with right now. And what the NBA has to understand is you don't get to, what all these companies have to understand is there's a lot of money in China and there's a lot of people there, but you don't get to do business the same way. And this ties into a lot of other things, about companies and corporations always threatening to leave if they don't get the right taxes. There's a lot of benefits to doing business in America as well. And I think I'll leave it with that. And hopefully this will be the beginning of a YouTube channel where I'll have more opportunity to speak on different things. Thank you.